Hello and welcome back to the True Crime Guys podcast. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Michael.
Well, we have quite a case here this week from a listener sent in. Jana, longtime listener and Patreon Creep of the Crop, has sent us a hell of a suggestion. What a case. A college.
Wouldn't expect anything less.
Yeah, a college creating a documentary and ultimately helping to solve the murder that the documentary was made about.
Right, almost 25 years later.
Yeah, pretty incredible.
Absolutely incredible. Really brought some attention back. And it's crazy that they were even able to solve this crime with this, but it's like it just stirred up all these emotions from people who
technically
were
they didn't bring
in
anything to light in the documentary that solved the crime. They just renewed interest in it and got a cold case detective on the case, like reopened the case basically.
Yeah, they had no evidence. They had no new evidence, no hard evidence whatsoever. It's crazy. That was such a long shot. And I know that probably wasn't their intention. Their intention was probably just to keep the victim's memory alive.
Yeah.
But it spread to something crazy. And it ended up solving this case.
Yeah. Well, is that enough of a foreshadowing to get into this?
I think so. Are you enticed?
Are you not interested?
She was in the bedroom. I walked into that bedroom. She was bound with her wrists behind her back. She was bound by her ankles. Her eyes were taped shut. She was bound with tape around her mouth, with a belt around her neck. She was naked. He's like raping her and saying, "How do you like that?" I was part of the cheering session. I called her. I encouraged the activity. They'd pull up on the belt, and her head would come up, and then they would release it, and then they would pull up on it, and then they would release it. I heard somebody say, "She's dead." I feared for my life. I never spoke to my family about this at all. I was afraid I would be charged. Afraid of the relationship I would have with my family afterward. I was also afraid of the relationship I might or might not have with my daughter.
Why did you finally decide to tell the police the truth?
For one reason, it's the right thing to do. Another reason is for me.
All right, our case this week is the murder of Janet Chandler. And as we mentioned, it was suggested by a longtime listener, Jana. And we have some main study sources to credit for this case, helping me with the crime line. We have Conspiracy of Silence, which is a fantastic article from 2008 by ABC News journalist Victoria Cordery. And then also a really good Glamour.com article. I'm not going to give away the title of the article because it'll give away basically this whole case.
Oh, it's one of those. Yeah, the headline just destroys everything.
The link to that article will be in the episode description. And I also got the documentary, the aforementioned documentary that the students of this college created, which helped break the case. You can purchase that on, where did I get that? It was $20 on...
oh, wow. Probably like on Amazon or something.
Vimeo, I think. It was on Vimeo.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, if you Google "Who Killed Janet Chandler" documentary, you'll be able to find it on Vimeo, and it's $20 to purchase it.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, but I'm sure that money probably goes to the college, something along those. I doubt one person is benefiting from it.
I'm sure, or maybe the filmmakers in general, whoever produced the film, whether it be that professor or whatever.
Yeah, I think it was the professor.
Yeah.
But I'm like, once again, if he's still a professor, it should go into his class.
I agree.
Maybe they'll make another documentary with the money. Who knows?
Right. I'm sure he would. I'm sure he'd put it back.
Yeah, so let's get into it. This case takes place in Holland, Michigan, which I want to visit now, especially during the Tulip Festival. It sounds like a really beautiful place right off the coast of Lake Michigan.
Right, but don't you dare pick one of those tulips, though. $50 fine.
Yeah, $50 fine if you pick a tulip during the tulip festival.
That's crazy. They take that shit serious.
Yeah, man. So Holland, Michigan is a city off the shore of Lake Makatawa, and opposite Lake Michigan from Milwaukee and Chicago. It's a serene place where sidewalks are lined with Victorian-style street lamps. And the city perhaps is best known for its Dutch heritage, hence the Holland name,
Right.
which serves not only as part of the city's cultural identity, but the local economy as well. The Tulip Festival in May and various Dutch-themed attractions attract thousands of tourists annually. And as you mentioned, if you pick a tulip during the Tulip Festival, it's a $50 fine. Oof. And you might think you can snatch one because there's over 6 million that bloom in spring.
Right. Who's going to notice?
Don't you dare.
Who's going to notice, man? You can't take one tulip to start some tulips in your yard. Maybe you want to be part of the Dutch festival.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit before we started recording about Holland and how I think it's really cool that immigrants come to this country and then they create like a little piece of home. Sometimes you see these towns that are themed after European cities and towns. Yes. It's pretty cool.
There's actually a town in the mountains here in North Carolina near Asheville, and it's called Little Switzerland. And I actually found out about it on Instagram. I saw this video of this dude longboarding, like downhill longboarding, where they're doing like 80, 90 miles an hour down this place. Fuckers. And I was like, man, this place is beautiful. I'm like, where is this? And, I thought it was somewhere like Switzerland or, somewhere in Denmark or something like that. And then I looked at location.
North Carolina.
And it says Little Switzerland, North Carolina. I was like, what? I'm going to visit this place. So yeah, I've been up there, and it's pretty magical. It really does look like a whole, a little town out of Switzerland. It's just like a little village almost.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's badass. I love that stuff.
Yeah, I guess just, a large group of immigrants all from the same place come to an area, and eventually they get into politics and they start changing things.
Doesn't Brooklyn have all like Little Israel, where it's like an entire like few city blocks where it's just entirely Jewish population?
I'm sure. I'm sure Brooklyn probably has areas where it's all sorts of different cultures. Yeah, they probably have
melting
all different
pot
types.
For sure.
Yeah.
So Holland, Michigan is also known for Dizwan, which is an original 250-year-old Dutch windmill that is situated on Windmill Island. And it's standing 125 feet tall with 40-foot sails.
Wow, they need to put some electricity on that thing.
Right?
Let that thing do some work for you.
Yeah. And pretty small town. As of the 2010 census, the population was 33,000, and over 28% of the population identifies as being Dutch.
Wow, still.
Of Dutch descent, still. So,
yeah, it's a pretty large part of the population.
Yeah. So let's get into the college that plays a massive role in this case. Hope College, it's a small Christian school that originally opened in 1851. And has a beautiful campus in Holland's downtown. And as we mentioned, this school would play a huge role in reinvigorating this case. The film director film instructor, David Schock, who worked at Hope College, came across Janet's story in the spring of 2003 while he was interviewing a detective who was retiring from the Holland police force. Schock asked the detective if there was a case that still haunted him to this day. Pointing at a photo of Janet that had been hanging on a bulletin board since 1979, the detective replied, "That Chandler case." Professor Schock thought that the 24-year-old mystery of the murdered former Hope student would be a good project for his class. Quote, "I don't want you to think that we are going to solve this murder," Schock told his students. "Instead, by making a documentary about the case, they should aim to revive Janet's memory," kind of like what you mentioned earlier.
I think that was the best they could hope for at that time. I mean, this is a 25-year-old cold case. You're optimistic to think that you're going to solve it with a group of students.
Yeah, and there have been some unfortunate things that had occurred with the investigation of this case. Like almost all of Janet's personal belongings that were, with her at the time of her murder were stolen from lockup.
Oh,
we can talk about that later. So, like, they didn't have much in the way of physical evidence to go with.
Right.
And no one was talking. So, yeah, as far as this, this class at Hope College solving this crime, it was unlikely.
Yeah, slim to none.
So let's get into Janet Chandler. Let's get into her life and her murder. She was born May 29th, 1956, and shares a birthday with John F. Kennedy and Carmelo Anthony.
Oh, wow. All right. Two legends in their own right there. Definitely Hall of Famer and Carmelo Anthony and JFK. I mean, one of the most famous presidents in history.
Yep.
No doubt.
And that's a case we could do someday for sure. His assassination.
Man.
and all the theories surrounding that.
Yeah, set aside a few hours for that one.
You set aside a month studying for that one.
Yeah, set aside. No, I mean, oh yeah.
It's one of those cases that like
Multiple
we probably
parter.
won't ever do if we stay consistently putting out an episode every week, because a week doesn't feel like enough time to really tackle a case like that.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, we'd have to like take a couple weeks off,
Yeah.
maybe a month, and then come back with like a 4-parter.
So back in 1979, Janet Chandler was a 22-year-old music student at Hope College, the very college that later does the documentary about her. She was also working nights as a desk clerk at a local motel. Her father, Jim Chandler, said that we tried not to get her to take that, meaning the job as a desk clerk at the hotel. Even then, a night clerk job at a motel wasn't the safest place to be. However, her parents' worst fears that motel job would result in something were realized on the early morning hours of January 31st, 1979, when her daughter didn't come home that night, and news broke the next morning when the Blue Mill Inn, news that the Blue Mill Inn had been robbed of about $500, and hotel clerk Janet Chandler was missing from the office. The Chandlers were frantic. Jim Chandler and his son, Dennis, Janet's brother, searched all night for Janet. So they got word at like 2 a.m. Wednesday morning that this had occurred and that their daughter was missing. And her father and her brother waste no time. They just jump in their vehicles and start searching town, searching rural areas.
Right.
Which is exactly what you and I would do.
Absolutely. You got to do something. You feel like you have to do something.
Can't just sit around and wait by the phone.
Right. I'm at least going to go,
especially in a small town. Like no way. I'm looking.
Exactly.
So her brother Dennis says, quote, "I just got in my Jeep and drove to Holland and started driving all the back roads. My dad did the same thing. Unfortunately, they would find nothing, and a day later, a snowplow driver would. He turned into a highway crossover south of Holland and spotted something buried in the snow. It was the naked and battered body of a woman. Quote, it wasn't until noon that Janet's parents were brought down to identify the body. Jim Chandler said about this occurrence, quote, you're just numb. You can't believe that something like this could happen, And he had to go down and identify his daughter's body, every parent's nightmare.
And it was preserved well in ice, in snow.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like it had been decomposed at all. She probably still looked like she had just been killed, God.
And it was kind of a fluke that she was found at all. It was one of those turnarounds on the highway that basically only like snowplow drivers and like highway patrol use.
Yep.
Yeah, and the snowplow driver he was curious to see that someone had been in there recently because they're so rarely used, and he saw some disturbed snow on an embankment and walked up there and found Janet's body. It appeared as though whoever dumped her had tried to cover her body with snow and kind of done a half-assed job.
Wow, I wonder, man, that just seems strange that a snowplow driver would be like, let me just go see what went on down here. Maybe he thought somebody was stuck.
But you know how it is. Like that's the job he does, and so like he knows when something's a little off. Like he sees all those turnarounds and all those, and like
I guess
rarely is there any disturbance in the snow in there. So it's just kind of like, well, why was someone in here?
Right. Well, I'm sure they plow those too, though. He could have been.
Yeah,
because they would have to for police and highway patrol. And
that's my point. He was the plow driver.
Yeah.
But he saw that someone had been in there before it had been plowed, which is odd. So it had to have been some sort of a 4x4 pickup, because I imagine the snow was pretty big. It was prior to the snowplow driver getting there.
Oh, yeah. So and I'm sure all the police in that area are driving 4x4s anyways, though. It'd be silly not to. I mean.
Mm-hmm. So Janet's funeral took place in the same church where she had sung in choir. And her dad would say, quote, in fact, she sang at her own funeral. Janet's recording of My Jesus was played at the service. Wow. Yeah, she was a very good singer. Just naturally, she had a voice that would carry like beyond her size. She was a small girl, but her voice could fill an auditorium.
I feel like you find that often. Some of the smallest people have the strongest voices. You see, like some of like the world's greatest opera singers. Some of them are so thin and so small. You're like, what? How?
That was her style of singing. Was opera. She had that like just deep opera voice.
Right.
There's a lot of recordings out there. The documentary that I watched that the film school made. There's a lot of audio played throughout it of her singing.
Oh, really? I'm gonna have to check that out. Yeah, because I was curious what her voice sounded like, but I imagine she was a gifted
It's not what you
singer.
imagine when you look at her picture.
Really?
It's not at all.
You mean like in the style or the sound of her voice?
No, just the sound. The sound of it is not what you'd expect from like looking at her picture of this little girl.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So the brutal murder, of course, stunned the quiet lakeside town of Holland. Police launched into an extensive investigation, at one point focusing on some local men who had done some barroom bragging about being involved. But to the Chandler surprise, no arrests were ever made. The Chandlers have always believed that someone from the motel must have done something or heard something the night that Janet was abducted, and that there were still people out there keeping a terrible secret. Investigators were also convinced that someone was holding something back, if not multiple people. But no witnesses came forward, no one talked, and Janet Chandler's case went cold. And this takes us back to 2003 when Professor David Schock and his students took on the task of creating a documentary about Janet Chandler.
Right.
And their task would be to talk to the Chandlers, to Janet's old college teachers, to the cops, anybody they could talk to that had anything to do with this case or knew anything about Janet, they talked to, including like her piano instructor, you name it. They talked to everybody.
God, why couldn't I be involved in any college projects like this?
I know, right? Sounds amazing.
God, neither high school nor college projects that I had were anything like this. Now, provided I didn't go much college, but still, I just don't. You just don't hear of this much anymore. I guess maybe in undergrad programs and whatnot. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, the film
rather.
was legit. Like you wouldn't think it was a college class that made it. They used real cameras. They had. They must have had like lapel mics because the audio was fantastic when they interviewed people. The edits and the cuts in the film were, on par with any other documentary you watch. It was well done. It was a little dry. It wasn't like on par with like an HBO documentary where it was like, riveting.
Right.
It was more just, learning more about Janet. It was just the interviews with people that knew her and
right. That's what's
and also the detectives that worked the case. So
right. That's something you have to understand about this documentary is that the documentary itself didn't bring anything to light. It's just the fact that it brought the case back up. Right.
Yes.
So I think that's why the documentary is not super profound because if you just, just knowing the information that we've already given you, you could watch the documentary and not be surprised. Right. You're like,
yeah, that's also part of it. When you watch it, you have to remember that it was made in 2003 before anything broke on this case.
Right.
It was back when, this was unsolved and they didn't know. There was a lot of talking about theories of what might have occurred, and now knowing what you know by the end of this episode, you're going to be like, you guys don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
These theories are wrong,
Exactly.
But,
God, if I was that professor, I would so be wanting to make like a follow-up or something now,
Right.
or just extend
sure.
it, make an extended version and go, oh man, you really could make an amazing documentary now, knowing what they know.
Right. Yeah.
That would be something.
For sure. And like add in the kids that did the documentary originally with you back in 2003
Yes.
now as like full-fledged adults and like give their take on making that film and then how things turned out. That would be good.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
Yeah. So at the time they only had 4 months to make this documentary, which meant they needed a crash course on Holland, Michigan in the late 70s. So they took to the library, they took to interviewing once again, people that were involved in the case back then. The students did interviews with the Chandlers and became taken by them and their open and willingness to share their daughter's story with anyone that was interested. That helped a lot. The fact that the Chandlers were, Janet's parents were so willing to help them with this project. Because what did they have to lose? They wanted renewed interest in their daughter's case as well because it was still unsolved.
Right, but I think they were shocked at the fact that they were still willing to drudge up all those past feelings and memories about the case.
Yeah.
That had to be hard. For any parent, that would be hard. But I think when you've lost a child like that, I hear time and time again, like there's never a moment throughout the day that you're not thinking about them. So it's not like they've been able to just bury this and forget about it. Exactly. And the want for closure, the want for justice is a lot more, because they've already got closure in the fact that their daughter is gone. So now something to revive her memory to justify her death would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So John Johnson, one of Professor Schock's students, talked about Janet's parents bringing out a trunk that they hadn't brought out in 25 years with all the letters and pictures of her. Quote, at that point, you kind of become, I want to do it for them.
Yeah.
So these students felt a lot of responsibility to do as good of a job as they could in representing Janet.
Right.
And I guess in a way you were right about what you said about they were surprised that the parents were willing to bring up all these old men, because that shows you right there that it's still painful that they haven't looked at this trunk of photos and stuff, since their daughter's death.
Right. Yeah. I would imagine her room is probably still the way it was. And
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here's where we learn more about Janet as well. Glenna Chandler says, quote, "She was easygoing and happy-go-lucky." This is her mother. "And she lived a sheltered lifestyle. We are Christians, and she was brought up in the church. And all of her friends were friends from the church. Every time her girlfriend would get married, we'd go to the wedding. It was hard." So talking about her girlfriends that obviously lived on beyond her and would go on to get married and stuff. Her father, Dennis, said, "Well, she definitely knew where she was heading. She believed in God. She was always doing little projects to make Christmas special and was all around a good sister." This is her brother talking now. But he observed that Janet had changed after she took the job at the Blue Mill. He said that Janet had, quote, "probably experimented with things adults do, maybe a little bit of drink, different dating." So yeah, she was a bit of a contradiction. She was a conflicted young woman. She was 22 at the time of her murder, as we mentioned, and she, even as her parents say, she was very sheltered growing up, and she just started to kind of taste the fruits of adulthood around the time that she was murdered.
Right.
She started having sex and maybe experimenting with alcohol and things like that. Things that she had never done and were forbidden in her household growing up.
Right. I think you just had a classic case of she was basically living a double life towards her parents.
Mm-hmm.
Her parents only saw so many layers of her. They didn't know her and how she was evolving and changing as she grew into adulthood. So I think there was a lot of things kept from them, on purpose, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. In her younger years, Janet had gone on evangelical missions and lent her voice to the to the church choir. In middle school, she worked part-time at a daycare center and later dedicated herself to a dream of singing. At one point, she had gone to nursing school and did that for a year before realizing that it wasn't for her.
Yeah.
And I think she was a transfer student to Hope College, so she wasn't the best well-known kid in school. She was kind of lonely as well.
Right.
The president of of Hope College was interviewed in the documentary, and he brought that up, that it was tough for transfer students at the time, and he regrets not doing more to help them blend in with the school.
Yeah.
And so there was, it seemed a side of Janet that seemed unsure and unhappy. The piano teacher that I keep mentioning, he was interviewed in the documentary as well. He was an interesting guy, as you'd imagine an older piano teacher would be.
Yeah.
He was a bit eccentric. He said that Janet attended Hope College and studied under him as a piano teacher.
Right.
And he described her as, quote, emotionally volatile, and said that she often ran out of class in tears when criticized. So she hadn't been through a ton of adversity.
A true
couldn't
musician.
handle criticism very well. What'd you say?
I said yes. So she was a true musician. Perfect.
Yeah.
Musicians are the worst about getting criticized. Yeah. That's tough.
Yeah, and apparently, he even mentioned that there was either other students or someone at the school was taking bets on, whether she would run out of class crying that day. That's how frequently it happened.
Whoa.
So a very sensitive young woman at the time. A music professor portrayed her as a talented student who struggled academically and seemed to have few friends. The students said that the experience left them a bit shaken, but even more committed to finding out what happened and who might be keeping silent about Janet's murder. Speaking of the students making this documentary, the more they learned about Janet, the experience of talking to her parents and all these people,
right?
They just became more emboldened to try and solve this mystery. Even though they were told when they went into it, this isn't about solving this. Of course they wanted to see if they could approach this at a different angle, see something that the detectives missed.
Oh, of course. And they had a fresh interest in it. And sometimes that's all you need. Some fresh eyes, some fresh interest, some fresh motivation.
Yeah, and of course, this hits home for them because she was a student just like them. 24 years ago, they could have been in her shoes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A student named Kyle Shepard said, quote, "That happened a whole lifetime ago. And then it just really puts a lot of things into perspective for you. She didn't get to live her life." And so they began to document Janet's life and death by first going back to January 31st, 1979, the night of her murder, where just after 2 a.m., police received a call from the motel where Janet worked, the Blue Mill Inn. Now, this is something we haven't mentioned yet. This is how this robbery and abduction was reported,
Right.
was a call to the police. The caller said, quote, "I have a reason to believe that there might be a robbery in progress down in the office or the lobby." Holland Police Detective Jim Fairbanks raced to the scene. Quote, "It had been a robbery. We could determine that. And it was also very clear that the clerk was missing." And of course, that clerk would be Janet Chandler. Fairbanks said that Chandler's jacket was still on the chair and her Salem cigarette still smoldered in the ashtray. So that puts into perspective that, they missed this by not a long amount of time. The cigarette was still burning that she had left. And Detective Fairbanks would interview the man who had called 911, Robert Lynch. But Lynch said that he had seen nothing.
So how did he know there was a robbery then?
Right. He'd overheard. He said that he'd overheard a girl pleading with some men saying, "Please don't take it all," something along those lines.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then when he went down there, they were gone. And, obviously no one working at the desk is odd. And the safe was open.
Right.
So there were some things about the abduction of Janet that really didn't sit well with the students when they started learning more about it. The motel was full of guests that night, but Detective Fairbanks said that he couldn't find a single eyewitness. The students wondered how could no one have seen or heard the abduction. Amy Schossler, a student, said, "How could they get her into a car? How was she taken without anyone hearing her scream or put up a fight? Did she know this person?" So then we began to question, were there two people involved? Were there multiple people involved? The students say perhaps their toughest assignment was visiting the desolate highway turnoff where Janet's body had been dumped in the snow and seeing the crime scene photos. These photos showed Janet had been strangled with some sort of a rope, wire, or belt. One of the students said, quote, "It made it a lot more real." And the more students learned about the crime, the more questions they had. What happened to her after the abduction? How long after the abduction had she been killed? What happened in the time between the abduction and murder?
Valid questions.
Sarah Hartman, another student, said, quote, "We became investigators. We went from college students, everyday classes, to investigators."
Yes. See?
Like you said, what a cool project, right? For you to take on in college.
I would never miss this class.
Right?
Damn.
Crazy. One figure in particular mystified several of the students. Janet's supervisor at the Blue Mill, who was also her roommate in and off campus in an apartment, Lori Ann Swank. 21 at the time of her murder, Swank had left town quickly afterward. They wondered why. They scoured old phone books looking for her, and their teacher, David Schock, knocked on doors in her old neighborhood. No one knew her whereabouts. So her best friend and roommate, who worked with her at the front desk, disappears forever afterwards. That's very suspicious.
Yeah, wasn't she the supervisor as well? I think.
Yeah, she was over Janet.
She was over Janet, that's right.
Yep. And as the final weeks of the semester neared, the class began weaving the interviews into film. So they started the editing process. The movie started at the end of Janet's life. The camera zoomed in on a crime scene photo of her hand poking up from the snowbank with a recording of her playing piano in the background. But then it shifted to happier times, childhood pictures in which Janet's broad smile lit up the frame. The student documentary Who Killed Janet Chandler opened at the Knickerbocker Theater in Holland, Michigan, just days shy of the 25th anniversary of her murder. Amy Schlossler, the student we mentioned earlier, said, "It was just very emotional for everyone. She had become real to me, and I think that she had become very real in the hearts and minds of everyone, especially everyone that saw that documentary."
Oh, absolutely.
That was the pivotal role they played in this case, was bringing her to life. I think that was part of the issue with her investigation, and like the lack of interest in her cold case was just there wasn't enough about Janet out there.
Right.
And that was the the role that they played by putting out this documentary.
I wonder how much of a role it played with her being a new person in this area as well. Not having a lot of friends, not having a lot of close acquaintances.
Being a transfer student.
Yes, exactly. People weren't really used to her being there, so really how could they miss her? It didn't seem like a big piece of the area of the local culture was gone, with her gone, you know? Perfect storm.
Yeah, so the students had brought Janet's story back to life, but they were no closer to solving the crime than the police had been 25 years earlier. No closer to finding out how a young woman could be abducted and murdered without a single person seeing or hearing a thing. The film winds down with a heart-tugging plea from Jim Chandler, who raised the possibility that he and Glenna might die without ever knowing who killed their daughter. Quote, "It would be a whole lot better to find out who did this and see justice done," he said. "The killer will ultimately get punished, but we probably won't know about it."
Nope.
And yet the documentary, they didn't understand. They didn't get it yet, but that documentary was about to get that trail of justice started. Professor Schock said, quote, "All along, one of our hopes and prayers was we could stir enough interest in a renewed investigation. Professor Schock had been lobbying the police to use his student's documentary as a jumping-off point for a cold case investigation. There was a little resistance, though. I mean, it wasn't as simple as they put out the documentary and then right away a cold case investigation is open.
Right.
Lieutenant John Slank, who headed up the state police cold case unit for southwestern Michigan, said, quote, "Quite frankly, initially I was hesitant to do it because I knew it was going to involve a tremendous amount of time. One big negative in this case was the fact that modern technology was not going to help solve it. He said there was physical evidence, but the physical evidence didn't bring any real value to the investigation. And the case would hinge on tracking down witnesses and getting them to talk."
Yep, that's the only chance they had.
So-
but this documentary was able to do just that. It kind of stirred some emotions.
Yeah. No one had talked in 25 years, but the investigators hoped that publicity generated by the documentary might encourage witnesses who kept silent in 1979 to come forward now. And like the Chandlers, Slank believed someone out there knew the truth. He assembled what he called a dream team of investigators, and they began learning everything they could about the Janet Chandler case. The cold case team went all out, casting a wide net of Janet's old friends and coworkers, and Detective Joffrey said that he used a student documentary to jog memories and perhaps stir some guilt. So they showed this documentary to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody, like as they did this sprawling reinvestigation into Janet's murder.
Right.
Like everybody they talked to, any old witnesses, they showed this film to them to kind of stir those emotions again and maybe get them to bring out the hidden secrets they had in their closet.
It's a great idea. I mean, let these people watch the documentary, and then you watch the people while they're watching the documentary, right? Just watch their emotions, watch their faces, their body language, and it really helped to give the police some good leads.
See the shame in their face, knowing they had a part of this.
That's right. That's right. I mean, you're only human. God.
Yeah. So the detective assigned to lead the reinvestigation was 45-year-old veteran David Van Lopik. One of the first interviews was with Janet's old roommate, Lori Swank. So they tracked her down. Unlike the Hope College professor he was unable to do that. But they found Lori. She was now in her 40s, and she was working as a nursing assistant at a hospital. Swank, as we mentioned, was Janet's boss at the motel, but was not working the night of the crime. They showed her a clip from the documentary, and Swank, even after all those years, appeared to be deeply affected. She said, quote, "It made me physically ill. What could she have done to deserve this to happen to her?" She brightly recalled Janet as, quote, "musical and fun-loving." But when the officer handed her a photo of showing Janet with several of the guards from the Blue Mill, Swank's upbeat mood seemed to deflate. Quote, "They were a wild group who liked to party," she said, adding that Janet had affairs with the guards and admitting that she did too. Swank said that she even had to reprimand Janet for using a display suite to have sex in. Yet Swank said she knew nothing and that she could not shed any light on that horrific night. So they found out some more of what had been going on, and it seems to point some more in the direction of these guards. And we'll get into who these guards exactly were, but the motel was not a typical year for this Blue Mill Inn. You know, it typically would be a very quiet motel during the winter months in Michigan. It wouldn't be a packed house like it was, but there was a strike going on, and we'll get into all that. The cold case team also tracked down a group of former security guards who had been living at the Blue Mill Inn in the late 1978 and early 1979. The men had been in town to police a bitter strike at the chemical plant, but the strike ended soon after Janet Chandler's murder, coincidentally.
Yeah.
The reason that this motel was popping at this time was because of a strike at the local chemical plant. During the winter of 1978, a strike was crippling Holland's Chemtron plant. And during the strike of 1978 and 1979, nearly 200 union members had walked out of the Chemtron plant, and the Teamsters organizers brought in experienced strikers from Detroit to lend muscle in the picket line.
That's so silly to me,
This is like a little war that was going on in this small town. It's pretty crazy because in return, Chemtron hired their own guys to fight back. The Wackenhut Security Company provided guards who could keep the gates open from strike breakers. So
Jesus, they had to bring in extra reinforcements. So you had to bring in like fake strikers, like people who weren't even working for these local companies.
From Detroit, the experienced union guys, man, from Detroit during the automaking days.
Yeah, they just bring in a big old crowd.
They bring in the heavy hitters,
They pay these
and in
guys,
return, Chemtron hires Wackenhut Security Company to come in and provide guards, and those guys were all staying at the Blue Mill Hotel, the Wackenhut security team.
Okay.
Wackenhut Security is a household name in international security services. Their name, however, is not currently in use anymore. In 2002, founder George Wackenhut sold his company to Group 4 Falk, a large security corporation working out of Denmark. This is Wackenhut Corporation provided security services to commercial and government organizations. Here's a little quote from their an information website about them. Quote, from its founding in 1954, the Wackenhut Corporation has been characterized by two attributes: an absolute commitment to the highest standards of integrity, quality, and performance, and an entrepreneurial corporate culture. This result is flexible, responsive, market-driven organization that proactively develops sustainable lines of services that the corporation can support, manage, and deliver effectively and profitably.
Damn, that sounds professional as hell.
It really does.
Not
and their
bad.
integrity and quality were on display during the strike of 1978-1979 as the picketers taunted the guards harassed the strikers and threw spikes under their tires. It was an ugly, tension-filled time.
Wow. Well, I mean, they're fighting fire with fire, I guess. I guess.
It's just so the contrast of going from the highest standards of integrity and quality, and then you picture them throwing spike balls under tires.
Fuck you guys.
And fornicating at the local motel with everybody and anybody and everybody.
Right. It was a different time, man.
Hi, creepers. The True Crime Guys think that you might be looking for more true crime content, and I am here to tell you all about my show, Military Murder. I am Margot, an 11-year veteran, a lawyer, and a mom, and on my weekly show, I discuss murders that occur around the world at the hands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and sometimes even veterans. Because have you ever realized how many serial killers have a military background? Think Golden State Killer, Israel Keyes, Jeffrey Dahmer. I pull back the curtain on military true crime cases that if they would have gotten the national media attention they deserved, like the Vanessa Guillen case, they would have rocked the country because the facts are so bizarre that they will have you wondering, how did these people even get into the military? I cover it all. Little known cases, serial killers, mass murderers. So long as there's a military connection, you will hear about it on the show. New episodes come out every Monday. And with over 90 episodes in the library, there is plenty of content for you to binge. Now go on, subscribe and listen to Military Murder. Bye, creepers.
What's up, creepers? I want to tell you about our sponsor, EveryPlate. With EveryPlate, experience fuller plates and fuller wallets with America's best value meal kit. Get meals you'll enjoy and your bank account will love delivered right to your door, contact-free. Getting dinner on the table daily used to be a challenge. Now let EveryPlate plan, shop, and deliver everything you need to cook a delicious meal at a delightful price. I have to admit, at first I was skeptical thinking meal kits might be expensive, but now I'm convinced you can get the same deliciousness at a much lower price. So a couple of meals my family and I enjoyed this week from EveryPlate was cowboy skillet pie with poblano and jalapeno peppers and smoky paprika pork chops with green beans and potato wedges. So nice when you have young kids to come home and just be able to cook up a meal that's basically pre-proportioned and planned out for you. You just follow the cards and it turns out delicious. Try EveryPlate for just $1.99 per meal plus an additional 20% off your next 2 boxes by going to everyplate.com and entering code CREEPER199. That's CREEPER 199. Everyplate.com, enter code CREEPER199.
I used to need coffee to get me through the day, but not so much anymore. I love True Niagen. True Niagen fuels the body's energy engines, maintains cellular metabolism, and even supports heart health. I have more energy and I don't need those extra cups of coffee since I started taking it. With 11 published human clinical studies and backed by Nobel Prize winners, True Niagen is a supplement that's clinically proven to boost NAD levels, an essential coenzyme required for cellular energy and repair. Since taking True Niagen, I have more resiliency. It helps my muscles recover after a workout. I just have more zest for life. Add more vitality to your life today with True Niagen. Right now, new customers can save 10% on their first purchase by going to TrueNiagen.com/creeper. That's TrueNiagen.com/creeper to save 10% on your first purchase. TrueNiagen.com/creeper.
What's up, creepers? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of strict and stressful dietary and workout programs. That's why I love Noom. They use a psychological approach. Instead of a strict set of rules, they empower you with knowledge to make you smarter and make better decisions when it comes to your life and your health. Noom understands that people live busy lives, and not everybody can be on a strict diet and spend multiple days at the gym. They have a healthier balance that's more moldable to your life, and as a result, it's more sustainable. A lot of people, they start these really strict diets and workout programs, and they beat themselves up, and within a month or two, they burn out so bad that they go right back to their old ways. Noom is trying to help you change the way you look at things and change your psychology and build something that can last forever and change your health forever. My goal when I started Noom was just to be overall healthier. And I really feel that it's made a difference. I have more energy because of the choices that I've made and the improvements that I've made to my diet by checking in every day with my Noom Professional and doing my 10 minutes on the app. I think about what I purchase at the store more than I did before. All these little changes, they build up into a big thing. With Noom's approach, you unlearn bad habits and you understand your relationship with food more. If you want to try Noom like I have and start building better habits for a healthier long-term results, sign up for your trial at Noom.com/creeper. That's NOOM.com/creeper. Once again, sign up for your trial at Noom.com/creeper. So after hours, the strikebreakers and guards let loose at the Blue Mill Inn, where rooms were reserved for approximately 80-man whack and hut force.
Wow.
So this motel, like I said, typically on any given winter would be damn near entirely vacant, like probably
Right.
a few rooms taken.
We're talking
or whatever,
the end of January.
was filled to the max.
Right.
Yeah.
She probably thought, Janet probably thought it was going to be an easy gig, working at a hotel desk in January.
For sure.
Like, come on.
Yeah, you sit at the desk all night long and you like read some books and maybe one or two people check in.
Right, yeah. You smoke a cigarette or two here and there. You just chill out.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't end up being that way, though.
A bar next door to the motel, the tap room, was full of local women waiting for the men, almost all of them being out-of-towners to blow their paychecks when their 12-hour shifts ended. During the strike, the Blue Mill Inn was particularly dangerous for a young woman like Janet to be working at. Van Lopik and his team were intrigued, but they had plenty of other leads to follow. The investigators found themselves coming back to the men who'd lived at the Blue Mill. Of course, I mean, how could you not?
Right.
That was just such an interesting dichotomy going on there at the time. These, quote, these guys who were transients, after the murder, they left town. They went to their home states, went to the other strike details, other duties. So it's just a perfect storm. These guys were all there. There were so many of them. They were rowdy.
Yeah.
There was a lot of partying and all kinds of stuff going on. And then the strike ends right after Janet's murder, and they all just scatter and disappear. And like, how are you supposed to follow up on any of them without tracking them each down and one by one and talking to them? And of course, they have vested interest in not saying anything.
Exactly.
Even if they knew something happened.
Yeah, without any type of lead, any type of witness in any way, shape, or form, it just seems like you're just standing in the middle of an intersection with roads going everywhere. There's nowhere.
Yeah.
Where do you go? Where do you start?
Yeah. So they would interview suspects in places as far away as West Virginia and Florida. Van Lopik and Detective Roger Van Leer pursued a promising tip to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where Van Leer questioned a convicted rapist. Detective Van Lopik said the guards basically said, quote, "We worked 12-hour shifts and we were just crashed at the motel. We didn't do anything other than work, eat, and sleep." Bullshit. Mm-hmm. With no one talking, the investigation seemed to be at a dead end yet again after a year of work, but everything was about to change. Detective Rob Borowski said that their first big break was when they interviewed Glenn Johnson in Minneapolis. Johnson was a former guard who'd lived at the Blue Mill Inn, and he said that he'd heard just a rumor, that a guard named Robert Lynch was involved in Janet's murder. Robert Michael Lynch had been 39 at the time of the strike, and because he was older than the other guards, he wasn't part of their inner circle.
Yeah.
He was wiry and frequently drunk. He worked inside the plant, handing out their per diem checks and performing other clerical duties. After the strike was over, he'd built a respectable life for himself in Three Oaks, a town 80 miles south of Holland, opening a beauty school with his wife and raising 2 kids. The cold case team had heard Lynch's name before. Remember that 911 call?
Yep.
So he was the one that called the police to begin with and reported the robbery.
Yeah, that said he saw nothing, but he knew there was a robbery.
During the call, he said, quote, "I have a reason to believe there might be a robbery in progress down in the office or lobby." That call, made by Robert Lynch, and Detective Jeff Lohr, listened to that call again, and something seemed phony. He said, "This sounded staged to me. There's no emotion." So the team would bring Lynch in for questioning and found him evasive. At 65, he was still drinking heavily, downing hard liquor every day, enough perhaps to dampen his dark past.
Perhaps not.
Detective Van Lopik said, "We came away from that interview believing there was more involvement on his part than what he was telling us." They went after anyone who had been close to Lynch back in 1979, once again showing clips from the documentary. So they're trying to stir emotions in these people that maybe had, more of a ancillary role in this case. They may have seen something and maybe not had a direct role in it, and they show this film to get them emotionally invested enough to maybe let them know what they saw.
That's right.
Knowing that they likely won't be in as much trouble as someone directly involved.
Exactly.
And a reporter asked Detective Floor at the time if he had seen anyone who had a particularly emotional response to seeing it, and Detective Floor said Harry Keith. Keith had been Lynch's roommate at the Blue Mill Inn, and he saw something in that documentary, something that would lead to the discovery of key evidence in the investigation. It was a photograph of Janet. Keith told the police that he was the one who had taken the photo back in 1979, and he showed them other photos he had shot during the time. Detective Borowski said, and this individual had a photo album full of photographs of parties, drinking, and things like that. So it turns out the security guards were not just working their 12-hour shift and going home and going to sleep, and that was that.
Wow.
Shocker,
really
right?
thought they were telling the truth there. Man, you can't trust anybody these days. They got such integrity, though. It's right there.
Or those days.
Yeah, or those days.
So the Blue Mill Inn, the detectives soon learned, was party central for the guards, with a conference area set aside for big gatherings and a rolling room-to-room party that ran all hours of the day and night. Lieutenant Slank said, "It was a den of inequity, and it was just a bunch of wild, unsupervised people that were there to party, drink, use drugs, whatever, get involved in sexual escapades, whatever their little hearts desired." Where else have we heard den of inequity? Have we have that, like, I feel like that played a role in one of our former cases.
I'm sure it has.
Remember that phrase.
That's straight from the Bible, bro.
Den of iniquity.
Den of iniquity. Yeah. That's
iniquity, sorry.
Yeah, that's straight from the Bible there. That's in a lot of stuff, especially in a God-fearing little town like Holland, Michigan, it sounds like.
Yeah. Was that in the Pazuzu case, maybe?
Probably.
Den of iniquity. It sounds like maybe they called his house that.
Yeah.
Which is pretty accurate.
I think I used that in an intro as well.
Yeah.
I used those lyrics in like the Daddy Tom Simmons
sounds too familiar.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that many times throughout my life.
Yeah. Yeah, so they start realizing what the stuff that was going on at this motel. And there was Janet, a girl they said they barely knew, drinking, sitting on someone's lap, wearing a guard's uniform. Janet, the night clerk, police say, got a lot of attention from the men. So in these photos, they see pictures of Janet dressed up, sitting on these security guards' laps. Lieutenant Slank said, and I think through her naivete, Janet got sucked into things at the motel that never should have happened.
That's what
Robert Lynch was in some of those pictures as well, and he was brought back in for questioning. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say I don't think she was really naive to the things that were going on at the hotel.
No, she was.
As
this is an exciting time in her young life where she
Right.
hadn't done any of this stuff before, and all of a sudden, there's all these men showing her attention. They're introducing her to alcohol and drugs, and it's just an experimental time in your life, as it should be in your early 20s.
Right.
You know, especially when you lived a very sheltered life. She's just learning more about the world at this time.
Exactly. The only naivete thing about it was that she trusted people that she shouldn't have. Which we see a lot in these cases.
Yeah. Detective Jeff Floor, the lead investigator, was brought in on the cold case team because of his skill of breaking down suspects. In fact, he had earned the nickname the Closer for his ability to break suspects, and now the Closer went to work on Robert Lynch after they brought him back in again. He showed a clip of Janet's father who appeared in the student documentary, and Detective Floor said to Robert Lynch, quote, "You look at that dad, and you could just as easily be sitting there. Do you understand?" Lynch said, "Yeah." Floor said, "You have children, right?" Lynch said, "Yes." 3. Floor said, "You remember the first time you went somewhere with them and you lost them?" Lynch said, "Yeah." Floor said, "You remember that feeling you got inside your body? Now just imagine, Bob, what would that feeling be like when you're talking about a 22-year-old girl?" Lynch was affected by what he saw. Detective Floor said, "I remember a slight tear in his eye. I remember a quiver in his lip, without a doubt." And finally, under intense questioning, Lynch cracked. He said, quote, "Well, there was a party that went haywire." He told detectives that Janet Chandler was at a party that night she was killed. During the interrogation tape, Detective Floor said, quote, "I want you to tell me the plan about the party. What was the party supposed to be about?" Lynch said, "I don't really know."
Be about.
And then over
Parties don't have
18
to be about
and-
anything.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of
exactly.
partying, detective. Yeah.
Getting fucked up. That's what it's
That's
about.
what it's about. Exactly.
Yeah. So they basically, Detective Floor and the other detectives just continually bring in Lynch and just continually
Just roasted him.
work on him.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just roast him
pressure.
over 18 separate interrogation sessions, which is not something that we're particularly fond of on this show, as we've mentioned before. That's just how a lot of times you get false confessions
confessions,
and,
yep.
and things like that.
Absolutely.
But in this case, it seemed to work for the better. Over 18 separate interrogation sessions, Detective Jeff Floor broke down Lynch, and Lynch finally revealed the truth about the party. Lynch said, quote, "It was all about Janice. And the truth about the murder plot was so elaborate and so unimaginable, it even shocked these veteran detectives." Robert Lynch said the conspiracy to unfold the night of January 31st, 1979 at the Blue Mill Inn. There was many people at this motel, guards, people that worked at the motel that conspired to do this to Janet, unfortunately. Lynch said that he and another guard named Bubba Nelson told Janet there was a surprise party in her honor and got her ready to go on that night, January 31st, 1979.
So that explains why there were no screams when she was taken from the hotel. Yep.
Yeah. Detective Floor asks him, quote, "Tell me what you mean by ready." Lynch said, "By taping her eyes so she wouldn't know where she was going. In fact, he didn't even mess with her hands. He just said, 'This is a surprise. We're going to a party.'"
Taping her eyes.
According to Lynch. Jeez. So she went willingly with them. And she was probably, it's really sad to think about, she was probably excited. You know, it's like a surprise party type of thing.
Right, yeah. I'm sure she was.
And so according to Lynch, Janet left the motel calmly, expecting a surprise. It could be one reason why perhaps no witnesses had reported hearing a struggle. And when they wondered about the robbery, they asked Lynch, and police said that they had found the motel safe open with $500 missing. And Lynch said in reality, him and Bubba Nelson were the robbers. They stole the money, and then Lynch made that phony 911 call, as they suspected.
Right.
I mean, they knew that call was bogus. Janet was then driven across town to a lakeside cottage where one of the guards had been staying. Lynch said the scene of the so-called party, only after she was a prisoner in that cottage did she realize the frightening truth. And this cottage has since been torn down. But what went on in that cottage last night is absolutely shocking, even if you're a true crime fan and you've heard a lot of horrible stuff before.
Yeah.
Prepare yourself. So Detective Borowski said, quote, "It wasn't a party, but a gang rape." Now Detective Floor pushed Lynch even harder. "Floor, I think you killed her. I think you know who killed her." Finally, Lynch confessed to being one of the men who assaulted Janet and strangling her with a belt. Detective Floor said, "So when I say you had sex with her that day, that's the truth, right?" Lynch said, "Yes." Floor, "And when I say that there was a belt held until she passed out and died, you checked her and she was dead, that's the truth." Lynch said, "But it wasn't intentional." The lakeside cottage where the murder took place was torn down years ago, as I mentioned. He said that he and other guards were raping Janet in an upstairs bedroom. Meanwhile, there was a party going on downstairs. Lynch said there were perhaps 25 partygoers, both men and women. No one stepped in to stop the relentless assault on Janet, and for more than 25 years, no one went to the police. It's just mind-blowing to think that how many people were in on this, how many people witnessed this, and none of them had enough of a conscience following this to come forward and say anything. Even if they didn't play a direct role in it, if they were just there and they wouldn't have even gotten in that much trouble, how do you not say something?
Maybe they just didn't have the awareness. I mean, a lot of people at a party, it's like, that's none of my business. There's a lot of that attitude, especially at a party with a bunch of people who don't know each other. You know what I mean? It's not like a party with friends and stuff. You're talking about just a random party where people were coming to a hotel from all over the place. And so, I think you had a whole lot of that's none of my business what's going on over there in that room or up there. And this was upstairs in a bedroom. So, and if you had multiple
me and you
men
briefly discussed, we briefly discussed before we started recording, whether we believe this was intentional or not. You were skeptical. But my outlook on it was like, if this is a planned gang rape where multiple people are in on it, one of them will find out is someone she works with.
Yeah.
I just can't see a scenario where they didn't plan on killing her, because you don't just like abduct someone, gang rape them, and then like expect them to come in on Monday to work and like act like nothing's like, they're going to report you.
Exactly.
She's going to be so distraught after this. There's just no way she's not going to tell her parents or the police, something like that.
And when you find out how deep this conspiracy goes with the people that were involved in this, you have to realize this was on purpose. There was no way that she could live through this. You couldn't have any witnesses. That's why no one spoke for 25 years about it.
Mm-hmm. So Robert Lynch, following his confession, was arrested and charged with murder, but he still had one more surprise for the detectives. He said it wasn't just men who planned the attack. Women were in on it as well. So during the another interrogation, Floor said, "So put yourself back in that room. You got how many women there are in this room during this planning?" Lynch said 2 or 3. Floor said 2 or 3 women. He said one of the women in particular was intent on getting Janet. Lynch, she played a role in being Janice's best friend, but actually I don't think she was. Detective Floor said, what was her name? Lynch at the time said he couldn't recall. So detectives started back to track down Janet's girlfriends from 1979. Diane Marsman worked at the Blue Mill Inn with Janet. She too had kept silent for years, but under repeated questioning, she finally opened up for the first time. Marsman said she watched from the balcony of the Blue Mill Inn that night, the night that Bubba Nelson abducted Janet, and that she went to the party with another woman who worked at the motel, Sherry Ruiz. Ruiz's admissions about the plans for Janet were even more shocking. Sherry Ruiz said, quote, to strangle her, to torture her. God, it's just amazing. Almost all the women she worked with knew about this and were okay with it or directly planned it.
Yeah. Well, they didn't like that Janet was getting the majority of the attention from these guards.
So crazy. So let's plan to torture and kill her, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. She has to be out of the picture. I mean, that's the only way.
Yeah. It's such a dark environment.
God, you're telling
this
me,
motel,
bro.
man. Like, you could make a film about this place.
Seriously. It's a small world, man. I imagine these women spent a lot of time at this hotel, right? They worked long hours.
Maybe part of it was just that they slept all day and then they worked overnights, and where they were just, it was a different lifestyle, you know. They were not, I'm not by any means excusing this at all. I'm just trying to understand a little bit more of how you even get to this extent of being
trying to put it in perspective.
Witnessing this.
When your life is at nighttime, you know what I'm saying, and you work at a hotel, like your world becomes even smaller in a town of 33.
And every night's a party involving drugs and sex.
Exactly. And the pool, the fish in the sea become a lot less, especially
smaller.
Yeah, in a small town of 33,000, and now you're thinking just a small tourist attraction this town has. It's just, I don't know, man. It's just a perfect storm. It really was. The jealousy just got to be too much, I guess. This is almost like the case of the teenagers we just did from Denmark.
Yeah.
Gosh.
It's like your world gets too small and you forget that there's a whole big world out there, and like they start obsessing over one thing.
I mean, you have to remember, honestly, these people weren't that much older. Early 20s. I mean, there's still plenty of people who are not fully matured in their early 20s. You know what I'm saying?
Robert Lynch being the exception. He was the older man at the time, being 39. And speaking of Robert Lynch, he finally was able to remember the one woman that was the primary planner of the attack.
Oh, finally.
He remembered her first name, Lori.
Oh.
So as we brought up Lori earlier, in 1979, Lori was her roommate.
That's right.
Her supposed best friend, Lori Swank, the one that had been hard to track down, the one that had left town right after Janet's murder. She had been the night manager at the Blue Mill Inn at the time of the murder, and she hadn't been working that night. Detective Jeff Floor, the closer, confronted Swank with Lynch's allegation. He said, quote, so the killer pointed the finger at you. That's how we came back here. And after several more interrogations, the dam of denial started to break open, and she finally admitted she was in on the gang rape plan from the start, and she was even there when it ended. The 25-year silence had been shattered. Lori Swank told investigators the whole story, that she not only helped to plan the assault, but witnessed it. On September 20th, 2006, Michigan Attorney General Mike Cox announced that in addition to Robert Lynch, 5 others were now charged with first-degree murder. Lori Swank and former guards Carl Pavia, James Bubba Nelson, Freddie Parker, and Tony Williams.
Wow.
And Mike Cox would say, I have to say that the allegations here are as shocking and disturbing as I've ever seen. And after 27 years of freedom, the defendants would be going to have to answer for what they did a long time ago. Facing life in prison, Robert Lynch and Lori Swank pleaded guilty, and both were sentenced to 20 years, and both agreed to testify against their co-conspirators. So they took a plea deal and got ahead of things.
Right.
By the time the police arrested the guards, many of the students whose documentary had helped to reignite the investigation had graduated from Hope College and had moved on. But nonetheless, they celebrated the arrests of all these men and women.
As they should. They had played a huge role in this happening.
Absolutely.
Wow.
The trial would illuminate the motive for the murder, Lori Swank's jealousy.
God, that's just...
She was Janet's roommate and had once professed to be Janet's best friend. But however, after taking the plea deal, she was, forced to testify in court against her, co-conspirators, but also, to her involvement. And she said that she testified, and you can watch this. It's on YouTube. You can watch her testifying. And she said that Janet was so popular with the guards staying at the Blue Mill Inn, and that it turns out had a lot to do with why Swank began to hate her. Donna Pendergrass, Michigan State Attorney General, said Did Janet's relationship with the guards create any problems with you on a personal level? Lori answered, yes, because I became jealous. She was more popular. I guess I was less popular. Swank testified that in January 1979, she had a crush on defendant Carl Pavia, one of the guys who raped and murdered Janet. He was the supervisor of the guards at the time, and Janet was in the way. It was a classic love triangle. Lori wanted Carl wanted Janet, and Janet was playing the field, which made Carl and some of the other guards angry.
Right.
Swank admitted that she would egg on Carl, being Swank. She would tell Pavia about Janet's alleged sexual escapades. The Assistant Attorney General Donna Pendergrast said, quote, "Why did you give this information to Mr. Pavia?" Lori said, "To anger him, to make him think less of Janet." Donna then said, "How would he react?" Lori said, "He would get angry, frustrated. He got upset." Donna then said, "Did he ever say anything that he intended to do in regards to this information?" Lori said, he said that he would take care of it. Carl would in fact take care of it, Swank testified, by coming up with a plan to ultimately humiliate and punish Janet. She said the other guards Janet had dated and then dumped were also in on the plan. Lori said, quote, "Janet thought a lot of herself, and it was mentioned that she would be brought down a few notches, teach her a lesson." My God. Teach her a lesson.
How do you teach anyone a lesson by killing someone?
Her. Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't quite add up. Teaching someone a lesson insinuates that they then go forward with this new lesson.
Right, with this new information.
Life, right?
Going forward is kind of the key part there.
But when you murder them, that kind of kills the idea.
Yeah. Not very good lesson.
So Swank said that the plan was for Bubba Nelson to take Janet to the cottage where Carl was housed during the strike. Then Robert Lynch would stage the robbery at the Blue Mill Inn and make that phony 911 call to police. Janet was taken away around 2 a.m. and held at the cottage until the party started the next afternoon. The jury came back with a verdict on the second day. Arthur Carl Pavia was found guilty of first-degree murder. The other 3 defendants were found guilty of second-degree murder and guilty of additional charges. There had been a picture of Janet posted in the homicide division of the Holland police for 28 years. Now it could finally come down. The prosecutor says he also kept a picture of Janet nearby throughout the trial, as a reminder of how important this was.
Yeah.
The 4 men convicted of murdering Janet Chandler would be sentenced a few weeks after the trial, and this gave Jim and Glenna Chandler, her parents, a chance to speak at the sentencing. Jim would say, quote, "Glenna and I have been waiting for 28 years for this day. They thought they got away with it, and for the most part they did. But because of the hard work and dedication of the Cold Case team and others, they've finally been brought to justice." Glenna says, quote, "I thank you for upholding the laws of the land and the jurors for seeing the true evidence and returning a verdict of guilty of the torturing and murder of our beloved daughter." And with that, all 4 men were sentenced to life without parole. And we have some updates as far as those that were convicted. Lori Swank would be released from prison in 2016.
What the fuck?
She was paroled in Pennsylvania, where she was living at the time of her arrest. And MDOC records show that as of 2018, she is no longer under supervision. So she's the only one that was directly involved that is now free.
What do you think about
Arthur,
that? I mean,
how long did she end up serving? So they were convicted in 2006.
She served.
So she
10
served
years.
what, 10 years? 10 years. And it was already a crime that was 25 years old, but she didn't get any punishment for those 25 years. She lived free. So I'm not a big fan of it, considering she was the driving force behind it.
This doesn't happen.
The reason this happened. She was the one egging on. Yeah, this doesn't happen without her.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I do have a problem with it. I think she should still be behind bars.
I think so too. And because she was well into adulthood when this happened. I mean, she was older.
Oh, yeah.
She was 21, 22.
It just seems so much more evil that she was supposedly her best friend. That just makes it seem so much more evil.
Right?
To me.
If you're willing to do that with somebody you lived with, somebody who you were close with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, man. And I know she was, just young, early 20s, still had a lot of maturing to do. But God, I just don't think you deserve to be out. I just don't think so.
No.
Especially not when all the guys that you involved in this are still in prison, or at least most of them. Or dead.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah, so Arthur Pava died in prison in 2013 at age 61. James Nelson, who went by Bubba, died in 2020 in prison, according to Michigan Department of Corrections records. And the other men convicted remain behind bars. Robert Lynch, now 81. Freddie Parker, and Anthony Williams, both in their late 60s, remain in prison with life sentences.
Wow.
And yeah, what a case. What a case.
Seriously.
Thankfully, justice is finally served. And as we've mentioned in the past, you can't feel safe being an older person right now that committed a crime back in the day, because there's just so many ways to get caught between DNA and genealogy and documentaries being randomly made about the case.
I know, right?
All the sleuthers online. There's just so many ways to get caught now. I hope you didn't murder anybody in the 70s or 80s.
For your case, I really hope you didn't.
Yeah, you're going to be waiting for that knock at the door.
Damn, there's so many people out there, Dan. There's probably thousands of people just in the U.S. who are waiting for that knock, who could get it at any given time.
Yeah.
That's good, though. Yeah. I'm glad they have to live with that.
You know what knock I enjoy waiting for?
What is that?
The delivery of my Oh My Gaia.
Dude, right? Me too. Nothing better than getting a fresh Oh My Gaia delivery, knowing you're going to smell great for weeks to come. Oh My Gaia is an innovative, all-natural deodorant, fragrance, and beard oil company specializing in paraben and aluminum-free products. Their innovative line of deodorants inhibit the growth of odor-causing bacteria while maintaining effectiveness. At Oh My Gaia, they use only all-natural, paraben, and aluminum-free organic ingredients. And guys, there's tons of scents to choose from. There's definitely something that you'll like, from even unscented if you don't want to scent at all, but you can go with vanilla, cherry almond, sandalwood, lavender, lemongrass, Egyptian musk, coconut, dreamsicle, leather, lumberjack, honeysuckle, fireside, bergamot amber, barbershop, pear, sailor. And there's new scents being added all the time, as well as our own scent called True Crime Pine. It's been available since we started working with Oh My Gaia years ago. It has our old school podcast logo on it, guys. If you want a cool jar, maybe a little collector's item in the future, who knows? But True Crime Pine be a great place to start with your Oh My Gaia order. And because you're True Crime Guys listeners, you can use the word creeper for 15% off your order. That's CREEPER for 15% off your order at shop_Oh My Gaia on Instagram or on ohmygaia.com. That's OHMYGAIA.com. Sorry, OHMYGAIA.com. I've only done it like a million times, so figures I'd just fuck it up. But
it's all good.
You guys won't regret it.
And so is Oh My Gaia. It's all good.
All good. All of it. Also got beard oil and scented oils and incense as well. All of your scented needs.
Right. All right, I want to take a minute to thank everyone who's taken the time to go and rate and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever. I want to say thank you to Teresa Reeves, who says, so impressed with these two. I'm loving this podcast. Enjoy your conversation. The banter's fun. You're doing a great job researching, writing good scripts, and my husband even listens to it. We'd love to hear you cover the Lewis Clark disappearances and killings as a huge local case. Thanks. Keep creeping. Right. Thank you, Teresa Reeves, and we will look into that. Then we got Kenna J., who said, you won't be disappointed. Just found these two in my 10-hour work days. Now I feel like I'm sitting around chilling with the boys. I will be upset once I catch up and can't binge. Well, that's what Patreon's for. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
That's right.
Then we got Nard24. Says 5 stars, my favorite podcast. Funny while still being respectful. Thank you.
Right on.
Then we got Hillfox84, 4-star review. I respect that. That's okay.
Yeah.
They said we say no doubt too much. That's okay.
That was probably just that episode they listened to.
They basically the whole review was like shitting on us, and then said, "Other than him, I like the podcast." Laugh out loud.
Yeah,
I think it was just. I don't know which one of us say no doubt too much.
It was probably
me, could be you.
Yeah, it was probably me. It was probably me during an episode. But I mean, sorry.
Right. Say thank you to Brit22789 with a 5-star review. Mm-hmm. Even though she doesn't enjoy the music intros, which is one of the things people love most about the show. It's not for everybody. Not everything about every podcast is going to be for everybody.
Exactly.
You can always just skip ahead of that. It's fine. But tons of people love it. So, and then we got Brit Rogue, who says, love you guys, 5 stars. Still a freeloader, getting close to finishing all the free episodes that I'm going to be searching for a Gold Creep Van sticker, I think. Love true crime, and you guys make it really fun, especially when you guys banter. Since I don't know yet, I would love for you guys to do a Jesse James episode. When I lived in Missouri, I could look out my window and see the house he was killed in right across the street from us. That's awesome.
That is awesome. The house he was allegedly killed in, you mean?
Yeah, right? Dun, dun, Obviously, he's still alive, still out there kicking ass.
No, I think he died in Missouri in like 1948 or something.
No, he never died, bro.
Oh, he never died?
No.
Wow.
Lives forever.
So he's like coming up on like 200 years old or some shit, probably.
We have I found a couple reviews on Podchaser.
Okay.
So I want to shout out those people. Kara Guitar says, love your podcast. I also rated iTunes and brought so we probably already shouted you out before, but thanks for double reviewing.
Yeah.
And then we got Giroux. I'm going to definitely butcher your name. Easterling said, great podcast. You guys helped me through my 11-hour drive from San Antonio, Texas to Florida. 5 stars. Thank you guys. We'll find you eventually if you've rated us on some other random platform.
Right. We occasionally
find you
check
eventually.
Stitcher sometimes. Yeah. We'll find you guys. But we appreciate any reviews and any word of mouth, any representation
Any
of the
support.
show. Absolutely.
Especially support on patreon.com/truecrimeguys, where $2 a month gets you access to our once a month premium episode that's only for Patreon, as well as $5 a month gets you just the banter as well. It's another podcast that me and Michael do.
Yep.
Every Friday, we jump on, we talk for about an hour, and it's not true crime related generally. It's just life. We just talk about whatever's going on, and also people sending us in all types of different questions, hypotheticals, you name it.
Right.
And you get to know us a little bit more.
We just released Just the Banter 47, volume 47.
47.
So there's quite a few of them on Patreon right now. If you guys want to know a little bit more about us and what we would do in weird scenarios.
Yep. Heroes rant and rave about different things that annoy us, things like that.
That's right. We have a good time on there. But that's every Friday, guys, we do that. And then every Thursday we post on Patreon, just to make a post just so you have a place to ask questions, talk back with the show, whatever you want to do. Because we read every single question on Just the Banter. So, all right. What
Very
else?
true.
And then if you're already a patron of True Crime Guys, check out our other show called Strange and Unexplained. Wherever you listen to podcasts, new episodes come out every Monday. That's Strange and Unexplained. It's where we tackle unsolved, missing persons, strange phenomena, cases like that. Cases we tend to stay away from on True Crime Guys, unsolved cases. There's a lot of true crime listeners that just hate unsolved cases, but that's okay. We try to give you as big of a detailed description of these cases as we possibly can. We also focus on less covered cases as well. I study, my wife studies and writes for the show as well, and then Lauren studies for Strange and Unexplained as well and does a synopsis at the end of every show. So you're actually getting 3 different people's perspectives on these missing person cases every week. So that's Strange and Unexplained, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Check it out.
That's right. Check out, it should say True Crime Guys Presents, or the author's True Crime Guys. There are other podcasts called Strange and Unexplained, but we were first. So there you have it. So look for the orange and teal, Strange and Unexplained.
That's right. And if you're into fantasy football, I have a fantasy football podcast I did with my buddy Tori, Full House Fantasy Football. It's on every platform and app. We missed this week so far, but we're going to be putting out an episode in a couple days, recapping week 4 and heading into week 5. So if you're into that sort of thing, check it out. Send us some questions, some start sits, things like that, and we'll get to those questions for you.
Yes, very helpful podcast. A couple of fantasy veterans shooting the shit, telling you what to do.
That's right. All right, guys, keep creeping. We'll see you next week for another Freeloader episode.
That's
Have
right.
a great week.
Keep creeping, guys.
True crime guys, in the desert we like a mirage. It's okay if you clicked on us cause you thought we was True Crime Garage. Now we ain't mad at you, sit down, let us talk at you. I'm talking to the creeper army, we out here making murder, get murder. True crime guys, in the desert we like a mirage. It's okay if you clicked on us cause you thought we was True Crime Garage. Now we ain't mad at you, sit down, let us talk at you. I'm talking to the creeper army, we out here making murder charming.